Hi, my name is Jacob. You will hear from my partners Ian and Gabriel in a bit. The title of our project is White Gold, the Mojave Desert and the Biggest Water Project You've Never Heard of. As we indicate in the abstract, the Cadiz Water Project is relatively unknown. We hadn't heard about it, neither had anyone from the Sunrise group at the Claremont colleges. Luckily, we can understand this project better by looking at past water infrastructure projects. With that in mind, we specifically looked at the State Water Project, a 1960s government project taking Northern California water to Southern California. This was significant because it fueled Southern California growth, but it's often criticized for its harms on Northern California ecosystems and sacred sites. On the flip side is the proposed Cadiz project, a venture capital project using water from the Fenner Basin, which is in the Mojave Desert. It's only a few hours from Claremont, and the end users of this project would be suburban Los Angeles residents. While Cadiz promises that it's ecologically safe, multiple peer-reviewed articles suggest that Cadiz may have an adverse effect on Bonanza Spring, a nearby critical habitat and sacred site. In response to these two projects, our question was, how does support and opposition for Cadiz compare with past 20th century water projects? With this approach, we can better understand how historic views about water continue today, but also how they might be challenged by resistance to extractive water projects like the Cadiz project.
To conduct our research on the State Water Project, we extensively consulted the Western Water Archive. We ended up mainly using two of its documents. First, a 1962 statement from the Mojave Water Agency supporting one of these infrastructure projects. And second, a speech from the director of the California Department of Water Resources, rather dramatically titled, "Without Vision and Unity, the People Perish." For our Cadiz research, we read the Cadiz website, some scientific publications, some activist op-eds, and then did 3 of our own interviews. First, with a board member of the Three Values Municipal Water District. Second, with the head of the Native American Land Conservancy. And third, with a hydrologist. The first finding we synthesized from these sources is that proponents of extraction use a warped definition of conservation that actually includes extraction. On the left here, you can see the Mojave Water Agency claiming that conservation includes deliberately lowering the water table to starve plants of water. Similarly, on the right, Cadiz likes to claim that water evaporating off of dry lake beds in the Mojave Desert is waste, thereby allowing them to construe their extraction of water from the desert as conservation. This contributes to the view exemplified in the quote from Brian Bocock here, that the best way to manage water resources is through extraction. Our second finding is that proponents of extraction tend to argue that future growth necessitates further extraction. In his 1961 speech, Warren claims that the State Water Project is required to prevent a reversal of Southern California's economic fortunes. Similarly, Cadiz today claims that existing water supplies are insufficient to meet the long-term needs of the Southern California region.
Our last finding is that in contrast to private companies like Cadiz and government agencies like Three Valleys promoting an extraction mindset, there's an emerging resistance that promotes a counter-narrative of environmental and ecological justice. Stakeholders leading this charge are a coalition of environmentalists and indigenous rights advocates that oppose the Cadiz project because of how water extraction harms both the land and people. And according to Michael Madrigal, quote, "The Cadiz project is definitely an extension of environmental injustice and an extension of settler colonialism in one of its most blatant forms." This pushback offers a new perspective surrounding our relationship with water, and it recognizes that we must reduce extraction because of its environmental and cultural consequences. Thus, with this new language in mind, we have a few policy recommendations. So first, we must lessen our overall water demand through increased efficiency and recycling of existing water sources. This has greatly reduced the region's gross water use in recent decades, but we must continue this trend and preclude new extractions such as Cadiz. Second, indigenous stakeholders must be fully integrated into shaping our water system. Currently, their land and cultures are deemed disposable to supply Southern California with water, and this exploitation must end. But according to Madrigal, the issue of water extraction may never fully go away. He says that, quote, "Maybe each generation is going to have to fight against water extraction unless we find some real solutions." This project is a temporary solution. Cadiz themselves only plans to run the project for 50 years. But a real long-term solution would be reducing our demand so we simply do not require new water projects.
Hello, and welcome to our poster, Water and Time, Reimagining the Los Angeles River by Lindsay Chu, Emma Dogleby, and Tiara Harmon. Our poster focuses on Los Angeles local government's conceptualization of the Los Angeles River from 1904, 1934, and the contemporary period. A century ago, the river was understood as both a vital resource and an unreliable hindrance to the city's development, leading to the outsourcing of water and the riverbank's encasement in concrete. Recently, local efforts have been made to reimagine the river as either a local water supply, much like its historical use 100 years ago, or as a site of recreation. However, these contemporary proposals directly conflict with each other, leading to our current situation where the LA River remains unchanged, polluted, and largely forgotten. Our research objective is to analyze the transformation of ideologies surrounding the Los Angeles River between the early 1900s and the contemporary era. Our research considers the possible futures of the Los Angeles River as various stakeholders continue to pursue further manipulations of the space.
Our methodology consists of a close reading of 3 sources from the Western Water Archives: a 1904 letter to the Board of Directors of the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, a 1904 letter from William Mulholland to Charles D. Walcott, and a document from 1934 titled Report of the Los Angeles River Water Supply. We then compared themes within these sources to those in newspapers and municipal reports from the 2000s. For background, our sources from the early 20th century mostly focused on maximizing the LA River simply as a utility and water supply, while our sources from the 2000s continue to view it as a water supply in need of flood control. They also shift to focus on the river as a possible recreation space. We've included some images that show the material change in the river over the past 100 years or so. For example, the 2 images under the abstract show the same shot of a section of Studio City from 1937, and again in 2015. Another 2 images in the lower center show Compton Avenue in 1926, and again in 2015.
And as you can see, the image in the lower left corner is a table taken from the Board of Directors of the Chamber of Commerce, showing the amount of yearly river supply versus the city's water consumption in 1902, 1903, and 1904.
The images on the right-hand side of our poster are taken from the 2021 LA River Plan, which highlight the future possibilities of recreation for the LA River. Through our analysis of the primary sources, we have been able to identify both persistent and emerging aspects of the relationship between citizens and the LA River over the last 100 years. Persistent themes include understanding the LA River as a vital water source to the city, as well as the continued perception of the LA River as an unreliable hindrance in the center of an ever-growing metropolis. The recent primary sources highlight emerging understandings of the LA River, not necessarily as a river, but as a flood control channel that may be used for recreation. As stakeholders seek to reimagine the LA River as a river, a flood control channel, and a place of recreation, they are in direct conflict with proposals to once again use the LA River as a vital water source for the city of Los Angeles. Unlike early understandings of the LA River as a necessary water source, current proposals reach far beyond basic human need. Understanding the growing conflict between the imagined possibilities of the LA River in the modern era highlights an issue that did not seem to exist in the 1900s. As contemporary proposals persist in direct conflict with each other, the future of the LA River remains uncertain. Will it remain forgotten, mistaken for a strange inverted highway, and feared as a place of danger, or will its presence and persistence grow valued as a place of play and beauty? Will we once again feed the city with water that flows between its cemented banks, or will the LA River remain, as only some notice it today, polluted, desecrated, and sometimes flowing by in a city that seems to have forgotten it?
Hello, I'm Makeda.
And I'm Gabe.
And this is our presentation, Floods, Fires, and Destruction, Effects of Developing in the Pomona Valley Floodplain. So for this project, our research question was, what are the factors that led to the California 1938 flood? What actions were taken in the wake of the damage, and what can be done today?
Yeah, and in order to approach this question, we analyzed documents on California floods, the San Antonio Dam, and water retention. Sources from the special collections include a 1965 Claremont graduate thesis on the fire flood sequences, which makes up most of our background information, as well as the story of the San Antonio Dam and pictures from the flood. Other sources include government documents, websites, and private organizations.
So when we started this project, we looked at some of the ecological and environmental factors that may increase flooding risk in the San Bernardino and San Gabriel Mountains. So the first we notice is that steep peaks really increase the flood risk. And with the steepest peaks in the San Bernardino and San Gabriel Mountains over 11,000 feet, this is a big risk. Additionally, normally dry sliding material down slopes is the main process of erosion by far. However, accelerated erosion occurs during the flood fire sequence. So plant roots hold soil in place while keeping it loose, which increases infiltration. So when plants burn, this increases erosion, and plant material, along with sand, rock, and soil, land in piles called debris cones. During the 1961 Johnstone Peak Fire, one debris cone represented an erosion rate 44 times the rate of normal erosion. So you can see that in Figure 1, this debris cone is blocking a road in the San Dimas experimental forest. And another danger with the flood fire sequence occurs when ash from burned vegetation mixes with the residual soil of the area and forms a hydrophilic layer, reducing infiltration. And further, erosion in the first dry season post-fire is thought to be 20% higher than normal erosion. So living in a floodplain is a major risk. The foothill communities from Fontana to Pasadena are all in a floodplain. And when the 1938 flood hit, existing flood control infrastructure was unprepared for the water that overflowed levees and channels. But if we look at an example farther back in history, we can see that a 43-day storm that began in December of 1861 put parts of Central and Southern California underwater for up to 6 months. And the 1961 to 1962 floods in general hit much of the American West. In Sacramento, for example, levees crumbled and the city was underwater, under 10 feet of water. And in Nevada, Native Americans tried to warn the white settlers that the water would be higher than it had been for 30 years and pointed up high to the trees and the houses where it would be. But the settlers didn't listen, and the natives left while the white settlers stayed. And in general, Native perspectives were not represented well in the sources we encountered on floods in the region and the San Antonio Dam.
Yeah, thank you, Makeda, for that great background. Now moving on to some of the findings and conclusions that we drew from our research. I will start with some of the details of the 1938 flood itself. For example, in the Pomona Valley, which is pictured in the background here on our poster, as much of 26 inches of rain were recorded in 24-hour periods throughout the valley. And this led to rainwater and stormwater coming down from the San Antonio Canyon at a speed of 30,000 cubic feet per second. Now, this is a pretty hard number to imagine. So if you turn your attention to Figure 2, you can see the aftermath of the 1938 flood with this aerial view from the San Antonio Canyon looking downwards into the city of Claremont. Additionally, the flood led to 2 to 3 feet of rain in Claremont, which led to 87 deaths and an equivalent of $1.3 billion in structural damage. Now, this structural damage includes local roads, major highways, railways, and an example can be seen in Figure 3, where the road is completely crumbled by the tons of not only water, but especially just debris, mud, and rock that was brought down from the mountainside with this storm. Now, in a direct response, the Los Angeles County Flood Control District and San Bernardino County Flood Control District met in order to draft basically legislation in order to build a more comprehensive flood control plans. Now, this ended up leading to federal funding and the Army Corps of Engineers building the San Antonio Canyon Dam at the base of the mountain. Now, this is officially an embankment dam that was built with the sole purpose of flood and debris control, and it was completed in 1965. 1956. The dam, which is pictured below, usually runs empty during the dry seasons with flow through that is permitted into the channel. And the San Antonio County Channel, as pictured in Figure 4B, runs down the mouth of the canyon and into the Pomona Valley, and this eventually runs into the Santa Ana River and then into the Prado Reservoir. The dam is almost 70 years old, and it needs constant maintenance during the dry season in order to prevent any catastrophic failures that may occur during the flooding season. Now, looking towards the future of flood control infrastructure in the area, local groups such as the Pomona Valley Protective Association work with local flood control agencies such as the Six Basins Water Masters and the Three Valleys Municipal Water District in order to capture stormwater by storing it into the underground aquifers. Now, this not only provides high quality water to local residents in the area during these times of droughts, but it could also alleviate the dependence on imported water in this region. Now, the water gets captured into the aquifers through mostly the use of gravel pits that are located in numerous places throughout the valley. One can be seen in figure 4B, just to the left of the channel, with like the concrete embankments here, or the gravel embankments on the side. And additionally, there's novel research being done into permeable surfaces such as asphalt and concrete, which could also additionally collect water during storms and store it into the aquifers.
So, given all this information, it's important to consider that there's geological evidence for mega floods happening every 100 to 200 years. And with this level of flooding, any built infrastructure may not be enough to prevent significant damage. Because of climate change, there are now predictions that we may have a mega flood one or more times in the next 20 to 60 years, and depending on the source. And they will occur with increasing frequency and cause significant loss of life and economic damages approaching $1 trillion. So, as floods become more severe and prevalent, these are very important issues to consider and plan for. Thank you so much for listening, and that is our presentation.
Hello. Today we're presenting on the Salton Sea, a toxic bed of lies. The Salton Sea is located on Southern California's San Andreas Fault, 236 feet below sea level. Until 1500, the waters of Lake Cahuilla covered the current Salton Sink. Cahuilla people would come down to the lake for fish and for vegetation. Settlers came in, and in 1905, a flood widened the Colorado River, and water came rushing into the basin, which gave way to the unintended birth of the Salton Sea, which over the decades became a tourist attraction. People would come and fish, but it was also this neglected child of settlers who imposed flawed visions onto lands and lakes. The Salton Sea Atlas, published by the University of Redlands in 2002, manipulates the lake's variegated history to appeal to its readership of stakeholders and politicians. This is not an atlas directed at a wider public.
So our research objective was to fact check the atlas and recenter narratives that had been neglected and silenced. Our research process was twofold. First, we read and flagged misleading claims in the atlas, and then we explored credible literature to fact check the atlas. So for our findings, overall, we found that the atlas creates this resurgence narrative, claiming that the Salton Sea has this bright economic future. For example, if we look at Table 1, we see that the authors textually push the idea that the Salton Sea is full of life. And if we look at Figure 3, the authors pair this photo of dead fish with the claim that the massive fish and bird die-offs were due to high salinity levels. However, outside research shows that a high level of chemicals was actually the main instigator for these deaths. Additionally, the authors attempted to hide contradicting facts through font size and image size. If we look at Figure 2, it depicts a full page of the atlas, and that tiny little red circle shows a fact that contradicts their overall message. It's very hard to see. So why are these authors trying to claim the sea is doing so well? There's 3 reasons. First, to exonerate themselves. Second, to attract business to the region. And lastly, to persuade policymakers from diverting water away from the Salton Sink.
The atlas does not properly acknowledge the role of settlers in erasing Cahuilla culture, and makes no mention of the many atrocities done onto the indigenous people. For instance, here's a passage from the atlas that reads, population estimates of the Cahuilla people before Spanish contact in 1774 were at 10,000. Today, there are only about 1,000 Cahuilla in the Salton Basin. This very passive voice doesn't take into account the fact that settlers forcibly displaced indigenous peoples from the land. Furthermore, as different dangerous levels of DDT and PCBs have entered the sea, and as water levels decrease, toxic chemicals are entering the air and are having poor health repercussions on neighboring Latino communities. A passage from an article we read reads, miles of dusty shoreline are exposed to desert winds. This creates perilous respiratory health conditions for nearby communities, the majority of which are non-white, non-English speaking, and economically vulnerable. The Atlas ignores the plight of these people. What the Atlas doesn't really take into account properly is that the Salton Sea is a place full of contradictions. It is at once a vital bird habitat, but also the site of massive die-offs. It is an unintentional creation that became a tourist destination and whose future is now imperiled.
So in order to move forward, more perspectives need to reach appropriate solutions. And so we recommend that the Western Water Archives diversify their collection of readings on the Salton Sea. All perspectives must be highlighted and analyzed in order to properly manage the Salton Sea in the future. So we recommend 2 articles to add, Haven or Hazard, as well as The Settler Sea, which will be published later this fall. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ivan Soto, and I'm a PhD student with the Interdisciplinary Humanities Graduate Group at the University of California, Merced. I made this video for the Claremont College's Western Water Archives Student Poster Showcase. I'll be highlighting my research poster along with the archival materials that I'm using in the Imperial Valley records for my dissertation project. To conduct this work in the middle of a pandemic, I relied on digital collections in the Imperial Valley records. I'll share my poster in just a moment, but first, I'd like to broadly introduce my research. My overall project explores how the Imperial Valley shapes and is shaped by agricultural production, carceral economies, and renewable energy. And I'm especially interested in the mid to late 20th century. Through historical methods, my dissertation examines the ways in which Imperial Valley's environmental conditions are rooted in structures of resource extraction, racialized labor, and industrial capital accumulation. However, for the purpose of this video, I'll focus on materials that inform my work. At the end, you'll find my contact information, and I invite you to reach out to me for follow-up questions. My poster is titled County of Canals, an environmental history of the All-American Canal. And before I discuss my poster, I'd like to draw attention to a quote from the digital collection I've consulted. In 1925, California Senator Hiram Johnson addressed crowds in the Bay Area regarding water in the Imperial Valley. His statements were published and copies are available through the Imperial Valley Records Water Resources Collection. Johnson said, "One thing and one thing alone makes the Imperial Valley possible for productivity and habitation. One thing transforms this hideous desert that has cruelly taken its human toll into a modern paradise, and that thing is water." Johnson's address to the Bay Area crowd is significant because it highlights water as the foundation of the Imperial Valley. Along the same lines, my work explores the implications of water development in the region. For the student poster showcase, I examined materials on the All-American Canal to explore how water in the Imperial Valley has irrigated desert lands, facilitated industrial agricultural growth, and transformed power relations in water politics. Earlier this year, I began research to highlight the significance of water in the area. And I approached this topic to better understand the background information for my dissertation. The construction of the All-American Canal is a key component to Southern California water history, and the materials in this collection help highlight the aqueduct's significance to the region. Materials like the chronology of the Colorado River Basin and the thumbnail facts of the All-American Canal contract underscore historical moments and public perceptions that transformed regional waterways. My cross-disciplinary work has relied primarily on historical methods to contextualize the Imperial Valley's environmental history since the All-American Canal. Materials in this collection broaden the scope of my work by offering information on the Imperial Irrigation District's objectives with the Department of the Interior, alongside speculative financing practices behind the aqueduct's potential to generate hydroelectric energy. Documents on political propaganda help demonstrate institutional support for the All-American Canal, and I'm placing these items in conversation with moments of contestation through materials in the Ben Yellen collection at the University of California, San Diego. Overall, my dissertation project will place archival materials in the Imperial Valley records in conversation with Imperial Valley's mid to late 20th century environmental and labor history. And to conclude, the materials in this collection demonstrate how the All-American Canal became a linchpin in the environmental, socioeconomic, and political landscapes of people's everyday lives in the Imperial Valley. Pamphlets, newspapers, and maps in this collection highlight the relationship between water and power, a discussion which is informed by this project but fully unpacked in my dissertation work. As a closing note, I'd like to say that this is a developing project and there will be updates in the future through my website. Thanks for listening, and please feel free to reach me at isolto5@ucmerced.edu for more information.